Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome back to the second part of the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 10th of January 2024. We'll just do a quick roll call of people online. Jess, if you could just check and see if everybody's here.
Councillor Braun,
I'm here, Jess, back again.
Councillor Harvey,
I'm here.
Councillor James,
Still awake, Jess.
Provost McDade is having some issues joining, but we're trying to get him in. Councillor Reid
Yes, still here.
and Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I'm here too.
Thank you. All other members are back in the Chambers convener.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll just move on then. And the next application is for the erection of a dwelling house at land 20 metres north of the Orchard, Lochte, Ammon Bank. And to introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
The next item is for the erection of a dwelling house on a site near Lochte, which has a detailed planning history stemming back to 2002. In this instance, the proposal seeks to change the house type on the site, which has already previously commenced and therefore kept that previous permission live in perpetuity. This application has been referred to committee in light of the receipt of 17 letters of objection to the proposals for the reasons outlined in section 23 of the report. The amended house type for the site has been compared against that which was previously approved and remains to be supported by this service as outlined within the report. I will now take members through a short presentation to detail the proposals further. Here we see the proposed site, or the aerial plan. This shows the site located between two dwellings at Ellengowan to the north and the Orchard to the south. Next slide, please. All of which share an access track from the A85, which also leads to a further property, Elhannon, at the southern end. In comparison to the previous application, the proposal would increase from 4 to 5 bedrooms, and in terms of built form, would see accommodation built over the garage towards the north. There is therefore a slight increase in width and height of the proposals. In respect of external finishing materials, it includes smooth rendered walls, slate effect concrete tiles, and the grey UPVC windows and doors. I will now share a couple of photographs from a recent site visit. Next slide, please. Sorry. So this slide that's on the screen is just to illustrate the previously approved and partially implemented layout in comparison to the previous slide, which showed the current proposals. Next slide, please. This first photo shows the view towards the grouping from slightly further west along the A85. Ellengowan is the traditional property to the road frontage, while the Orchard is the more modern property rendered on the right-hand side. Next image, please. We now see the view from the shared access into the site. A section of the hedge on the left would be required to be removed, while the tree could be retained. Next image, please. Lastly, to clarify, following the publication of the report, it has been identified that there's a couple of minor amendments required to some of the proposed conditions, and it has been outlined in the circulated update report. This relates to condition 5, which has been expanded in respect of the requirements of Transport Scotland relating to visibility displays and the need for a construction traffic management plan, and also condition 7 is being expanded to accommodate for biodiversity enhancement. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We do have deputations on this item, so I'll now hand over to the vice convener for the deputations procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Can I call in Mr. De Vere? I'll call in Mrs. De Vere. Mrs. De Vere, you have 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes, and when you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I speak today on behalf of the majority of the residents of the hamlet of Lochte who have objected to this planning application. The objectors' concerns support the objections raised by ourselves, with particular concern in relation to the overdevelopment of the area and ongoing safety concerns in relation to the A85, where there are regular accidents within our little bit in Lochte. This is not helped by the increased traffic pulling in and out of driveways, the new flooding in the locality due to the number of new houses being built, and the destruction of the local biodiversity. The residents' amenity is being directly affected by these issues. Over the past 5 years, we have encountered difficulties in obtaining clarity from PKC Planning Department in addressing or even considering our legitimate concerns raised in relation to our ongoing loss of amenity at Ellengowan, relating to the issues with the development plot and previous unviable planning conditions that have been imposed. It saddens me as a native resident of Perth that I found it necessary to seek an independent legal opinion on the validity of the objections submitted and the directions of the previous report of handling from Scotland's top legal planning expert, Neil Collar at Brodie Solicitors, and he confirmed that our objections were indeed valid and should be considered, and that the first report of handling did not meet the legal requirements for consideration and approval. And as a result of this, a new report of handling has been submitted that has been referred to today. This report cherry picks from both local and government policies and guidelines, and Mr. Collar of Brodie's has once again confirmed to us in writing that this is the case, offering the opinion as to that it was upon reasonable grounds for rejection of the application, both in terms of policy and changes of use of the area, which we have with us today. We respectfully ask that the committee members take an evidence-based approach to the consideration of the application, with particular reference to the objection and document addendum submitted by Ellengowan. Over the past few years, there have been many changes in the immediate area, not to mention inaccurate information which previously informed the decisions and conditions. These are material considerations which are addressed by our supporting evidence in our objection. I'm aware it might be quite difficult to visualise what our problems are because our garden isn't a regular setup. The proposed plot sits within the actual garden ground of Ellengowan and is accessed down our single track driveway, which is shared by 3 houses already. Ellengowan's garden is split into 2 areas, with the formal lawn to the north of the plot in the front principal elevation of Ellengowan, and with the more activity-based garden, which runs down directly in front of the plot. To access this part of the garden, I need to cross over my driveway, which has presented many safety challenges for the family. And this has occurred during many previous attempts to lay foundations, which I would like to say at this point have all been demolished and cleared. So the site is cleared. Any previous works are no longer relevant because a building standards told them to remove it all because it was all being done inaccurately and incorrectly. So that no work has commenced at the moment. The work has blocked the driveway totally for significant periods of time, preventing entry and egress from our properties. I've even been prevented from cutting my grass because I haven't been able to get to my garden safely. And needless to say, it's been incredibly dangerous. One of my children who is autistic can't go to our trampoline because we have to cross over the driveway. One of the HGVs sprayed our garden and pets with hydraulic fluid, and our driveway is now physically damaged because it's not designed to take the weight of the vehicles that are going up and down it. One can only imagine how bad the ongoing loss of amenity and damage to our property will be if this development is approved. Transport Scotland have confirmed to us in writing that our driveway, which the plot has access to, cannot meet the requirement of 120 metres in each direction, where it meets the A85, as the maximum visibility to the east is 47 metres. So you have to drive all the way out to be able to see to get out. This confirms that it does not meet the statutory requirements of TD 41/95. With home deliveries having gone up over 50% and more in the last few years, the traffic on our driveway alone has increased enormously, and quite frankly cannot take any more traffic on a daily basis with no turning spaces, and no passing places. We have no street lighting or pavements at our end of Lochte, which is greatly increasing the pedestrian risk crossing the 85. Furthermore, it's confirmed that there's an intention to move the current bus stop closer to our property. And this will only increase the pedestrian traffic, which is already a dangerous and overcrowded access point. Daylighting, sunlight, and privacy are important to the quality of life. The height of the proposed house is excessive and higher than the other developments nearby. It is overbearing, it is out of scale and relation to the plot. It is absolutely wedged in. Spatial strategy and transitioning to sustainable living for all are key objectives of NPF4. Not only will this proposed development evidentially and permanently plunge the 3 primary family rooms of Ellangowan into darkness for almost half the year, it will almost totally eliminate our passive solar gain, thereby considerably increasing our energy consumption. The lack of light will permanently remove our ability to transition to solar renewable energy, in contradiction to the core intent of NPF4. Even without a house, the overshadowing of a simple garden fence at this time of year is almost over our entire lawn. It actually almost reaches our window with just a fence. It is deeply unfair to rob us of all our natural light in the winter, as the other side of Ellangowan, as you've seen, faces the road. It faces completely north, and we only have very small windows there. The current report acknowledges that there will be a marginal breach of overshadowing of the south-facing primary family rooms. And it claims that a member of PKC has made an assessment of this. However, we've never been visited by anyone to make this assessment, and our windows are very close to the ground. It's an old building. It does not meet current building regulations of your windows being 3 feet up, because they're not. And in relation to this objection, though, we've relied on EU government data, and that evidentially shows that these rooms will be completely overshadowed for 5 months of the year. And this will have a serious impact on the quality of our life and potentially our health, given that sunshine is now considered incredibly important. The new report of handling ignores previous imposed planning conditions which were due to real burdens. In particular, we would highlight the real burden in favour of Ellangowan within the proprietor's title deeds only created last year that the beech hedge on the south boundary of the plot, now identified for partial removal by the report, must be permanently preserved and maintained for all time coming. The intent of this burden was to preserve amenity for all and prevent overdevelopment of the grounds by shoehorning in any further developments. Neither the current proprietor nor the neighbouring properties have a legal right to remove or alter the hedge whatsoever. Removal of the hedge, even in part, will reduce the biodiversity of the area, as we have yellowhammers who nest in all our hedges and a local population of red squirrels and great crested newts. Again, this goes against NPF4. The report of handling states that an element of overlooking is to be expected and accepted within a settlement area. But we are a rural location with greenbelt fields on one side, mature garden and fields on the other side of the 85. The proposed plot has patio-style windows that will look directly into our garden to the east and will overlook our garden to the west. We're currently not overlooked and have privacy, not as the author of the report suggests. The Power River runs at the bottom of our driveway and regularly floods both the neighbour's house, and I don't just mean their garden, I mean inside their properties, all of our gardens and the fields, which we have submitted photographs of this. The construction of another house will just increase flooding, something that the A85 and the local area struggles with already. Within the plot, there's also a groundwater well and is marked with historic plans, and SEPA have told us that the groundwater needs to be investigated, and yet this is still being ignored. The original application started in 2002, and much has been made of the reports of the consideration of previous planning applications and what should and should not be considered in relation to this application. However, there have been significant material changes in the immediate locality and amenity since then that are not being given the same due consideration. A serious question needs to be asked why a house has not been built in all this time, why the ownership of the plot has changed so many times, and yet the author of the report still recommends approval. Perhaps PKC Planning Department gave the answer to this in their 2012 application, in which they state then such a development would not normally be given permissions. I thank you in advance for your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Your presentation was bang on 10 minutes. Are you willing to take questions from members? Can I ask members to populate the chat? Councillor Allen.
That does say, please. Thank you, Vice-Councillor. It's just really to help with a couple of things that you said there. 2 quick points. Is your own house prone to flooding?
Apologies, technology. Yeah, our own garden pools with water within the front. The flooding down the side, the garden that runs down the side, is where it's designed to drain off the road. So we have flooding that runs all the way down there. So it comes all the way up to us already. And there are actually photographs that we have taken over the years showing how the water from the field, which is actually designed, is left there to flood, comes all the way up to the garden wall, all the way up past where the plot would be, and it's already floods. So putting more concrete in, I can't understand how that's actually going to make any situation better.
Thank you. And the second quick one was, do you personally have solar panels on your house?
No, we don't have anything just now, and we have gas central heating, and we will have to transition, as will everybody else. We can't put in an air source heat pump because we are covered with wood panelling that we've been told that we would get listed building status. I have actually applied for a blue plaque because we have a historic person from Perth that lived there who started the first mobile library, and his private papers collection, are currently in the archive in Perth. And so the house is actually a significant house. So we couldn't remove that panelling to put in the required insulation for a heat pump. We don't have enough space for a wind turbine, so our only option is solar panels.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you, Mrs. De Vere, for your presentation. You mentioned a hedge. I wasn't quite sure where the hedge was and whether it overlaps into the neighbouring property or where exactly is it sited?
I will get a hang of this, I promise. The hedge was put in at the time the orchard was constructed, and a burden was put in place that the hedge cannot be removed by anyone. It's a legal burden, which, you know, if required, we will then, the next step will be, we'll put the burden in and they can't build the house. So it seems silly to ignore it for everybody's benefit. The hedge runs all the way along from the edge of the road, all the way along the orchard, and all the way along to the wall. And it is actually on the proprietor's side, but he's legally not allowed to touch it. I have the current copy of his title deeds, which shows that, if anyone requires to see the legal documentation.
So for clarification, it's just to the north of the orchard. It's not the bottom of your property as such of Ballingowan.
It is not my property, no. But it's for everybody's amenity because it has actually so far blocked the house. And it's very wide. The plot itself is actually incredibly small, and that is why to actually get a house in of this size, which is disproportionate, he is proposing to remove the hedge, which he legally isn't entitled to do.
Councillor James.
Thanks, Mr. De Vere. Great presentation. I noticed the letter which I think you forwarded to everybody from Neil Collar, I think, from Brodie's, mentions about the legal ownership for his visibility displays. The land's not in his ownership. Do you know whose ownership the land is in, please?
Yes, mine.
Councillor, Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Mr. De Vere, I'm just wondering if you could explain to me, you just mentioned there about Traffic Scotland saying that the road junction is unsuitable. Is that correct? And then you went on to mention that you're applying for a blue plaque to attract more people to come to see your house. I'm just wondering has there been any discussion with Traffic Scotland about improving that junction out with this planning application?
The blue plaque was actually, because I'm particularly interested, that is my area of interest in historic Scottish documents. It's what I do for a living. So I was particularly interested in preserving that and promoting somebody from the local area that seems to have been neglected. So it wasn't about bringing people to the property. Traffic Scotland had to do a survey. They were called out as requested by the council, but because they did it on our land, they had to do it through us. And they provided us with the information, which is all FOIable, and that no, that you cannot see. If the council actually had come and made a site visit, they would be able to see you can't see to get out. And we have emails to prove that I can present if required.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. Thank you for your deputation. Can I call on Mr. De Vere? Mr. De Vere, it's the same process. 10 minutes for your deputation, and whenever you are ready to start, I'll start the clock.
Hopefully I'll be slightly briefer than my wife. I think she's covered most of the salient points, but to quickly just cover off a couple of things. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, thank you very much for your time today. As my wife's already covered, we submitted objections in relation to the application dated 2nd of August 2023 and an addendum dated 10th of August 2023. Neil Collar-Brodie's solicitors has confirmed these objections raise relevant planning issues and concerns. He has confirmed the council must take these objections into account when deciding the application, and that the concerns raised form the basis for reasons for refusing planning permission. The new report of handling, in paragraph 2, states that the extant planning permission is a significant material consideration. However, as highlighted in the advice from Mr. Collar, in relation to the previous report of handling, and again restated by him in his updated advice in relation to the new report of handling, the Court of Sessions has confirmed that a decision maker can depart from the reasoning in an earlier decision relating to the same site and on the same issue, provided a clear explanation is provided for departing from it. For example, in paragraph 36, it states there is significant increase in the building height, and paragraph 42 refers to a dormer window being several metres closer to the boundary, potentially increasing the degree of overlooking and resulting in a greater loss of privacy. These changes justify refusal of permission. MPF 4 was adopted after the previous planning permission was granted. MPF 4 could therefore provide a reason for departing from the previous planning permission. The report does not contain a complete assessment of the MPF 4 policies. Paragraph 9 states that policy 17, rural homes, is not relevant, despite the fact that Lochte has previously been described as rural by PKC and is considered by other agencies, including Transport Scotland, to be rural. However, the report does not refer to policy 16, quality homes. In particular, policy 16F states that the development proposals for new homes on land not allocated to housing in the local development plan will only be supported in limited circumstances, including compliance with policies, including local living and 20-minute neighbourhoods. The report does not contain any assessment in relation to policy 15, local living and 20-minute neighbourhoods. Mr. Collar has confirmed as part of his assessment that there are no accessible local amenities, so the development does not comply with policy 15 of NPF 4. Another change is the presence of great crested newts, a European protected species, referred to in the 2nd of August of 2023 objection. The objection also mentions that the environment has changed considerably since permission was first granted in 2009, both in terms of the physical layout and the level of traffic on the A85 and the driveway of Ellingham. However, the report of handling ignores this. In law, these are reasonable grounds for the Determination Committee to refuse to grant planning permission, contrary to the recommendation in the new report of handling. Planning Condition 5 requires the maintenance by the developer of visibility displays on the driveway at Wellingown. Mr. Collar has again confirmed that this is an invalid condition because the applicant neither owns nor has control of the land required for the displays. Furthermore, Transport Scotland have confirmed they require these displays, together with turning of all site traffic on the plot, to be implemented prior to the commencement of development. We have previously raised safety concerns with PKC planning in relation to this, but they have been rebutted and now ignored altogether in the new conditions. We have informed PKC planning of the real burden in favour of Wellingown on the retention of the beech hedge, along with the fact that the plot is in reality smaller than shown on the drawings and as such is possibly not viable. In relation to this, the previous planning condition applied to all previous applications is now removed. We can only conclude that this is excluded due to the information we have provided in good faith and raising reasonable concerns over safety and ongoing loss of amenity. We have now lived at Wellingown for 5 years. As a result of the ongoing problems with this plot, we have suffered a continuous and ongoing loss of amenity, narrowly avoided injury in some cases from site traffic, and suffered damage to our property. Not to mention having to seek independent legal validation that what we're saying in our objections is truthful, valid, and a lawful consideration. These, together with the rebuttal of our reasonable concerns and conflicting responses from PKC planning, have not only caused the loss of amenity, but also unreasonable levels of distress and anguish to my family. I would ask you, as elected representatives of the public, that you fully, fairly, reasonably, and lawfully consider our objections in full, together with the evidence provided against the report of handling and with consideration of Mr. Collar's advice, who is ranked as one of the top legal planning experts in Scotland. I thank you all for your time and consideration of this matter.
Mr. De Vere, would you be willing to take questions from members?
More than happy, thank you.
Members, if you could use the chat function. Councillor Massey.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you. You said there that you've lived in Wellingown for 5 years. So did you buy the property 5 years ago?
Approximately. You'd have to ask my wife the exact date.
Okay, thank you. So you bought the property in the knowledge that there was planning permission for development at the orchard?
Not entirely correct. The planning permission, I can't give you the full reference at the time, and when you searched on the council website, was 17 FLL something or another. It was shown as being out. The vendor also confirmed it as being out, and that the developer had problems in developing. We had a surveyor come down and looked at it who said, look, that plot's unviable. When you searched the council website, 17 FLL, whatever it was, is the only one that came up. Subsequent planning permission was then granted under a material variation as 18, whatever it is, FLL. So there was no consultation or chance to raise anything under that. It was just renewed effectively. But at the time, the advice from an independent surveyor and a vendor was, how that ever got planning permission, I don't know, and it would be very unlikely, and it's unviable as a plot. And one of the things they highlighted, in fact, was the underwater, the groundwater, the well, which my wife mentioned, and the likelihood that that's an underground watercourse.
Thank you.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. De Vere. I'm just asking your thoughts, your interpretation, if I may, on this letter from Mr. Collar. Obviously, we're looking at an application in front of us, which is, as we see on the plan, on the screen, which is that's the design at the moment, which this application refers to. But I'm reading this letter, and I'm just wondering from what your interpretation would be. Is it your interpretation that refusing this, we could also refuse the extant permission? Is that your interpretation of the letter?
Sorry, I'm unsure what you mean by the extent refusing
Well,
the extent permission.
We're looking at this particular property as it stands, the design on the plan in front of us, and that's what this application is for. But I'm just trying to find the obvious site has got planning permission on it, and is your view, your interpretation of the letter from Mr. Collar that can no longer apply? I'm just trying to get to it.
Yes, correct.
Is your view that can be rescinded as well?
Well, it's not my view. It's PKC's view that they have confirmed to us in writing that the previous planning permission has expired, and therefore the process needs to be considered anew in whole. And Mr. Collar has also confirmed in both letters that the whole application and objection should be considered in the whole and anew, and that the councillors can have the right and obligation to do so. As I understand.
Okay, I'll have to query the officers, but thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. De Vere. Just a quick question, really. Are you against development of the site, or is it just the size of the development that you're against?
I can answer. In principle, we have no objection to the development of the site, providing it's reasonable. The concerns we have raised over the years have primarily been about occupation of our land, turning on our land, danger, as my wife's touched upon, to our children. That obviously, as one of the other councillors asked earlier about, yes, we bought it knowing it had planning permission. When we looked at the then expired planning permission, the view of professionals was that it was unviable, and that such a house would never be able to reasonably be constructed or should be approved. Yeah, you know, I'm sure you could build something there, but you definitely couldn't build this. So we're for want of a better word, we're not being NIMBYs. We're simply objecting on what's now proposed and the serious amenity issues that we've encountered for the last 5 years, which will continue. And the number of people who have tried to develop this site unsuccessfully before we purchased it, well, that didn't affect our amenity, but for the last 5 years, it has seriously affected our amenity and will continue to do so if this is passed as is. Sorry.
There are no further questions, Mr. De Vere. You're free to go. We have Mr. Megginson online. Can you hear us, Mr. Megginson? Mr. Megginson, if you can hear me, if you try *6 to join the meeting.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're here to give us a deputation. You have 10 minutes, and whenever you start your deputation, I'll start the clock.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for hearing me. Unfortunately, just due to prior engagements, I can't be there in person, hence why I'm on the phone. I'll try not to take up too much time, just kind of going through you know, everything that's been sort of outlined in the planning officer's report, and just obviously come back to a few sort of elements of what Mr. and Mrs. De Vere have sort of raised. So firstly, I'd like to just point out that 17 objections were raised to this. However, when you sort of whittle this down to same households based on surnames, this takes the number down to 13. Further to this, at least 10 of these use the exact same letter template, and it's our belief that of all of these objections, only one of them is actually stays within the hamlet. So we also received 2 letters of support as well, and one of them are definitely from another neighbour within the hamlet. And when our client has gone out to the other neighbours within the hamlet, they have expressed sort of support for this new build. So what I'll do is I'll go through sort of issues raised and discussed within these objections, which are also within the planning officer's report. So just going into the policy briefly on the house, being acceptable on the site. You can see by the site plan that this is clearly an infill development within the existing hamlet, with the largest material consideration being the planning history. So numerous applications from 2002 have been approved on the site, including 2 full applications sort of more recently, which establishes the principle of residential development on the site. Furthermore to this, obviously what the planning officer was saying, there has been sort of work carried out on a previous application, and to that effect, planning in perpetuity has been gained for a former house type on the site. So just going into the house types as well, as is noted in the planning officer's report, we aren't sort of proposing anything that's out of touch with any of the previous applications. The house type matches the height and the sort of eaves level similarly to application 1700957 FLL. And obviously, the more recent one in 2018, it's not too far away from the proposals either. As has been raised, there was issue in the report with a dormer to the northernmost part of the roof. That is stated as a condition to any permission, which we are happy about. We have prepared plans that actually replace the dormer with a roof window just to negate any issues with privacy to that effect. Going on to the sunlight aspect, it was noted by the planning officer that there was a marginal clash with this 25-degree assessment. However, when we looked at this with the planning officer, the 25-degree line from the centre of the window of Ellengowan actually just clashes very, very marginally, as he said, with the ridge of the roof. And obviously where it clashes with the ridge either side of that, obviously we've got a pitched roof, so that's coming lower towards eaves, so there isn't any issue there. And to that effect, we feel that the proposed house currently raises no amenity or daylight and sunlight concerns to any neighbours. On the roads and access, we know that the Transportation Department at Perth and Kinross Council have not objected to this, and we trust their sort of view, and they're the experts on that, so we don't really have any comment on that. The site is not within a SEPA flood risk area, and all drainage and fill water will be adequately drained within the site. And we do actually have a building warrant approved for this house, which does obviously show that the proposed surface water and the proposed foul drainage arrangements are okay and acceptable on the site from a building standards point of view. The house will be insulated to a high level with solar panels installed to minimise emissions. And on biodiversity, we did we got correspondence from Perth and Kinross Council about the sighting of a great crested newt, to which we had an ecological survey carried out. The findings from that ecological survey came back, and the site was assessed as providing low suitability to support protected species, and no evidence of protected species was found during the survey. In line with the survey recommendations, a toolbox talk will be given to all site workers prior to beginning works, where we've asked to remain vigilant for signs of wildlife on the site and report anything as appropriate. On the hedge, yes, we are looking to just remove sort of part of the hedge to the south, just in line with where the sort of two dwellings will sort of meet, the orchard and the proposed dwelling. The owner of the orchard actually approached our client and kind of said, this is causing issues to our house with sort of the hedge, which is on our client's sort of ground, it was kind of, imposing onto their dwelling. So it was agreed to cut this back in the meantime. There is a burden within the title deeds, but of course burdens can be varied, and we'll look into this from a legal point of view accordingly. However, obviously this is not that is not a planning issue, so I think that can be dismissed planning wise in this meeting. We are also looking to provide compensatory planting of a hedge to the northern boundary in the rear curtilage of the proposed house as well, which will be provided as part of a condition within the officer's report as well. Overall, we feel the proposed dwelling is acceptable on the site, with residential development being established several times historically. The proposed dwelling will contribute positively to the hamlet, with existing amenity and biodiversity protected. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you, Mr. Megginson. Are you willing to take any questions from members?
I am, yes.
Please give us a moment while members populate the chat box. Councillor Braun.
Sorry, Vice Convener, trying to get unmuted. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Megginson. Just a quick question. It comes back to the point raised by the objectors. This is the visibility displays on the road. There is a condition 5 that this be maintained, and they've made it clear that your applicant doesn't actually own the land to do that. I'm just wondering how you can get around that, how you can comply with that condition.
We need to sort of check exactly who owns the land. I mean, I'm not sort of doubting that Mr. and Mrs. De Vere do not own it, but there are obviously existing houses that are coming off of that existing access track that will need to, have safe sort of guidance onto the road. So I guess they were talking about Transport Scotland. We would look to get them involved and just get their comments on it, and I think there would be some kind of agreement with them and possibly something legally to obviously get something in writing that we can that the visibility displays will be maintained, and that's obviously for the safety of everyone in the hamlet, and I think that should be something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind, and yeah, I think that we would deal with it through Transport Scotland. So
thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thanks, Mr. Megginson. Mr. Megginson, I'd just like to take you back to one of the deputations that was made earlier by Mrs. De Vere, and she suggested to us that the hedge is protected. So can you help me understand how you can actually take some of that away?
Yes, so I believe it's possibly protected by a burden within a title deed, and that's all it is. We can obviously sort of title deeds can be varied, they can be amended, so that's something we're going to look at in detail. But in terms of a planning aspect, I believe that's a legal aspect. There wasn't any the planning officer wasn't against some of the hedge being removed, but obviously we will check it legally. And to be honest, I don't think if it does need to be retained, I don't think that really poses a problem. It was just more the issues it's caused with the neighbouring property as well. Just to sort of keep it as low as possible. Well, obviously remove it just so none of that comes back to them. But if we do need to keep it, then I'm sure my client will be happy to do so.
Councillor Cuthbert, first question.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Yeah, I'm trying to work out how much gap there is to either side of the property once it's constructed. Is it a metre on either side, and does that necessitate the removal of other things as well as the hedge to make that possible?
That's exactly right. It is 1 metre. There won't be any sort of knock-on effects. Foundations and everything will be within the applicant's curtilage. As I said, the hedge is just a slight constraint, but with it trimmed back, we can certainly probably work with it. So that's exactly right. It's 1 metre to either side.
Okay, the second question. There was mention of the issue with blocking the access road. Do you have a traffic management plan in mind and how would you handle that so that other residents weren't inconvenienced during construction?
Yeah, so what we would do is that would be sort of conditioned within construction design management regulations, and we have been speaking to a principal designer who is going to help the client just sort of put together all these sort of aspects. So there will be like delivery plans, circulation plans, everything like that, to obviously make sure that safety is at the forefront of everyone's minds, and that any issues like that, blocking and anything like that, will be avoided or at least mitigated. But we do have a company on board who will be providing construction design management regulation advice throughout the build.
Mr. Megginson, there's no further questions. Thank you for your time, and you're free to go.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Convener, there's no further deputations, so I'll hand the meeting back to yourself.
Thank you. Can I ask the members, do they have any questions for officers? Councillor Allen.
Not really sure how to put this, but I'll do my best and give it a try. This has been ongoing since 2002, and there have been various and different applications. Just for my own interest's sake, can you tell me, have they got bigger every time?
Certainly, I couldn't comment necessarily going back to the kind of 2002 permissions. I'm certainly just basing it on the last application back from 2018, which we have confirmed made a technical start on site and is therefore, excuse me, live in perpetuity. So on the basis of the most recent and material consideration, yes, the scale of the dwelling has increased. As I outlined in the report, it's gone from 4 bedrooms up to 5, but we still consider it to be acceptable and within the confines of the development plan policies in respect to placemaking.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, my question kind of relates to the same thing, but I'm trying to work out, in terms of extant permissions, you're saying it's the 2018 application that's extant, but that was made, or it continued to be in place because the foundations were put in. But from what's been said, the foundations have been removed, so that you're basically back to where it was before any building work went. So does that mean still that it's because some work was done, it is then extant, even although all that work's been removed?
Oh, yes, and the council has confirmed that the development commenced and the permission remains extant.
Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Couple of ones. As far as I asked a question about the letter, and I'm hoping the officers have seen the letter from Brodie's saying that because of several conditions, we could refuse this application. Is that a fact, or does the extant permission override that, please?
Legislation requires that we require to take the policies of the development plan into account together with any other material planning considerations. In this instance, we've taken MPF 4 into account as the newest part of the development plan, alongside LDP 2, with it featuring within the settlement boundary of Perth. And then also at the side, we have to take into account the cognizance of the fact that there is that extant permission on site. So it's a collective in respect of the considerations there. So Brodie's are correct in highlighting that, yes, we can take new elements into account, such as MPF 4, but from the perspective of ourselves as planning authority, we're of the view that it is compliant.
Thank you.
Councillor James, just as an addendum as well, I think part of the issue here is that one party may look at a development plan and material considerations and come to a conclusion which differs from another. So I think that the comments that have been made are that if someone so choose to weigh the development plan and the material considerations in one direction, that may well see a different outcome from another. The position of officers is that in weighing the development plan as it stands and the material considerations, that the recommendation is that planning permission is granted.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, convener. I'm not sure who. I just want to clarify a point here. I'm not sure Mr. Williamson or Mr. Elliott may have to clarify this, and that is back to this letter again. It does say, and my interpretation of the second paragraph, I just want to clarify this for now, is that the extent permission can be overridden. That's my interpretation. This may be a question for Mr. Elliott, I think, because it's a legal matter, but the letter says here, the Court of Session has confirmed that a decision maker can depart from the reasoning in an earlier decision relating to the same site on the same issue, providing a clear explanation is provided for departing from it. In other words, that's my interpretation, that the extent permission is not set in stone. That's a legal question. I appreciate that. Mr. Elliott might better clarify that for me.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. Just to say that there is an 18 permission that's been made extant, and that's been confirmed. The only way to change that, to my understanding, is to have it revoked. It would not be dealt with under this application. In terms of this application, I'll go slightly further forward. You have a strong material consideration, which is the 18 consent. You've also got a 17 design as well. You are able to look beyond that because you're now looking at NPF 4. And what you're looking at there, bearing in mind you've got an existing consent and a design for an existing consent, another design prior to that, what you're looking at is how this proposal then is in accordance with those previous designs, but also whether development plan changes, which is primarily NPF 4, now justify refusal in light of the planning history. Try to be as clear as I can. I appreciate we're in a particular situation. Straight answer to your question is that comment I would disagree with. The 18 permission is not something you can do anything with in this application.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yes, it's a question of the overshadowing. I was listening to what the De Veers were saying. Are we able to ignore the fact that there is overshadowing? Is it sufficiently insignificant, if you like, not to be material, and something we don't need to consider?
Certainly, it's something to consider, and what we must do in this instance is compare the proposals that are now tabled against those which were approved previously. As I'd outlined within the report, the height of the ridge line has increased by 1.3 metres. Obviously, there is an element of build-up over what had previously just been an attached single garage towards the north of the property. But when you take those into account, the 1.3 height increase, the positioning of the footprint, there's not a massive difference in respect of the positioning there. And then when it comes to the 25-degree rule that we generally utilise to calculate impacts on windows, etc., then there is just a very marginal impact from that. Yes, there would be some overshadowing to garden ground, but obviously through the approval that's already there, that would also be the case anyway. As well, so it's making that comparison between what's been approved previously and what we're considering today.
Yeah, I'll maybe just give you a explanation of visual and what we're talking about. So in terms of the 25-degree rule, where you take a point at the window to the property that's proposed, what we've got here is a property that is orientated north to south with a pitched roof, and the line which intersects on the 25-degree angle is at the top of the apex. So there's a triangle where that would intersect, which would mean that there would be shadowing into the window as the sun passed that small triangle. So we don't feel that that small infraction in that small triangle for a short period of time is unacceptable. We have considered it. We feel that it's acceptable.
I was just going to ask, that's the ground floor window, presumably we're talking about on the...
Yes.
Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, convener, again. Just another question, which relates to condition 6, which is the northernmost dormer is not approved and is to be replaced with a roof light. I take it that's a Velux. Do you actually need planning permission if you wanted to put a further Velux in, please? Thank you.
Only once the house was built would it then benefit from permitted development rights, and a further Velux or other manufacturer would be available potentially, but obviously that could be confirmed through a certificate of lawfulness.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, convener. And just further to Councillor Cuthbert's question about shadowing, would there be any effect? One of the representations that was made earlier was about solar panelling. Would this construction have any effect whatsoever on solar panelling and direction of sun, etc., etc.?
I am by no means an expert on that, but given that we've been flagging the potential overshadowing of parts of the development would be to lower ground floor windows, if solar panels were to be provided upon the roof, I would have thought it would have been unlikely to have been impacted, but obviously it's dependent upon other tree cover, etc., that's in the area at Lochte as well. That's all I could say.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. My question was partly covered by Councillor Allen. It was, to go back to what he said, mentioned in the deputation about choice of alternative heating for other properties. Is that something we as a committee should be taking into account for this application?
In short, no. Every property has its own particular situation, scenario, suitability, etc., etc., and we shouldn't be looking at each and every likelihood and whether or not there would be an impact. That's out with the scope of the application and not a material consideration. I think as Mr. Williamson said, that the indications are there would be no shadowing of the roof. But there would be shadowing within the garden ground. So if ground mounted solars, yes, there may be restrictions on the power output in relation to any panels that were put in there, but that's not a consideration that we have in relation to here. As we know, there are many, many ways in which you can improve the energy efficiency of your property, and you shouldn't just consider one and one only, but the most suitable to your context.
Thank you. Any further questions? No further questions. Can I ask for a motion? Councillor James.
Sorry, struggling with mouse today. I don't know why. Yes, I weighing everything up here. I mean, it's quite a small site in the first place. This has grown dramatically, even with conditions put in place. I don't think it's fitting for that site. There's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes with regard to the visual displays and the land ownerships and removal of hedges. We're trying to fit £20 of manure into a £10 sack. So for that reason, I would propose that we refuse this application. And I know Mr. Elliott is going to ask me on what grounds. Placemaking 1A. Bear with me. I've got a local development plan up in front of me. Creating a sense of identity by developing a coherent structure. I don't think it adds anything to the actual the area. Lochtey's quite unique anyway, and I really do think the height of this, 1.3 meters, that's a significant increase. Overshadowing, in fact, overshadowing is, I know it's not for this application, but the one that's to follow on a similar issue is overshadowing is an issue, and I think we need to take notice of this. So I'd recommend refusal. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Cuthbert, I see you're seconded.
Yes, convener, I can completely concur with what's been said. I think this is an excessively large building being put into a very small plot. I think a 1 metre gap either side with a hedge that over stretches over into the ground. I would say that it's policy 1B C probably is the one that I would go for in terms of refusal.
Thank you. Do we have an amendment? Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I would like to move that we approve the application along with its the conditions that are attached to the application.
We have a seconder for Bailey Williamson. I will second Bailey Williamson.
Convener, at the moment what we have is a motion by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Cuthbert to refuse, and I'll come back to the terms of that in a second. We have an amendment which is clear, that's to approve, which should be in terms of the updates, of course, as well, the revisals. And that's Bailey Williamson, seconded by convener, yourself. Coming back to the motion, couple of direct my comments to both Councillor James and Councillor Cuthbert. You'll need to obviously recall that there's a 17 design and an 18 permission, which was already a substantial house. So Councillor Cuthbert, you refer to 1 metre gap either side. My understanding is there's not much change, if any change, between this proposal. The change is the height and the scale of it, rather than either side of it. And Councillor James, you also mentioned overshadowing, but really said that was in relation to another application. So my understanding is what you're saying is this particular design, by due to its sort of scale and massing, and you've referred to policy 1A and 1BC, is just simply is inappropriate. It's not fitting, and I'll come up with wording in a second. But that's my understanding is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But the overshadowing, I said, is something we need to take cognizance of because it is coming up. Like I said, it is coming up in another application as well. I wasn't dismissing it from this one, but yes, you're right. In 1A, 1BC.
What I think it would be is refuse, contrary to refuse as the proposal is contrary to Perth and Kinross LDP Local Development Plan 2, 2019, policy 1A and 1BC, as are due to the scale and massing of the proposal. I'll come to that, yes. Failing to respect the surrounding environment. Now, I haven't heard you mention LDP 2, sorry, NPF 4. It's just policy 1A and 1BC we refer to in placemaking terms. In terms of the overshadowing, I think that would be a distinct ground separate from this one, because it's a kind of particular consideration for the overshadowing. And my comments there is you have heard from officers that the view is that it would only be overshadowing into the garden ground and maybe into a window for a small period of time. and that was not viewed as significant. So I think I have to ask you whether you think there's sufficient grounds to diffuse an overshadowing. Scale and massing is the sheer size of it within the development site and how it affects the other properties. Overshadowing is a sort of narrower aspect, more particular aspect.
Okay, I take that on board. However, we've already heard that their heating system, which is gas, it has to be replaced, and they're limited as to a suitable replacement, which comes down to solar panels. Nothing says that solar panels have to be placed on a roof. So if they were, for instance, are we limiting their use of their ground for solar panels?
Yes, well, overshadowing in the sense of how that impacts on the amenity of the garden and the house. The issue you've mentioned, as Mr. Smith said, is not a relevant planning consideration. How they choose to update themselves in terms of their energy efficiency is for those individuals. So I think if you kind of look at overshadowing of the Ellengowan property we're talking about, as I understand it, as I say, whether that's significant enough to refuse, and that's what I'm asking. The information you have before you, yes, the objectors have their view. Officers have said, no, it's not significant. And the question is whether you think there are grounds for that. Yes, there is a policy in NPF 4.
I've got NPF 4 up in front of me. I'm desperately thumbing through it as we speak. But yeah, I know you're saying overshadowing isn't something that we take into consideration, but it will have an impact in the future when Ellengowan does try to change their only available heat source. So I don't know how that would impact. If it's indefensible an appeal, Mr. Elliott, then I'll quite happily leave that and just go with policy 1A, 1BC. But
I think, Councillor James, what I'm saying is that you're coming back to the kind of energy efficiency of Ellengowan, but that's been said is that's not a material planning consideration. What I'm asking is whether you think the overshadowing that's been reported, whether that's sufficient enough to diffuse. I can say, well, you've asked about whether it would be difficult to defend an appeal. From what I've heard, yes, it would be difficult to defend on appeal, but it is your decision whether you want to put that forward. It would be NPF 4 policy 16G2, which is quality homes, and you've also got LTP policy 17, which is residential amenity, overshadowing the garden and the house of Ellengowan, affecting the residential amenity. My issue is not so much what are the policy terms. My issue is whether there's sufficient grounds to put that forward.
okay, yes, and thank you for pointing me in that direction. I've just got it up, and yes, our planning officers actually agreed that yes, there is minimal overshadowing, but nevertheless there is some. So yes, I would include it, please. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Cuthbert, are you in agreement? You want to put that forward as well?
I would concur. Yep.
So, members. Members, just to clarify, I think where we're going, I'm going to come in slightly too early. There's still one ability to comment and the summing up on the motion. But for clarity purpose, the motion to diffuse is to diffuse on two bases. Firstly, that it's contrary to your local development plan 2, policy 1A and 1BC due to the scale and massing of the proposed dwelling. Does not respecting the surrounding environment. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, contrary to NPF 4 policy 16G2 and LDP2 policy 17, as the proposal would overshadow the garden and the house Ellengowan, adversely impacting on residential amenity. And of course, we have the amendment at the moment, which is to approve in line with the amended conditions. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Can I ask members if they have any comment on the report? No comments. Okay, then we'll go to summing up. Councillor James, do you want to sum up?
Thank you, convener. And again, yes, this is a difficult one. I remember this coming around before on planning, and there was a lot of discussion at the time then over whether we should or should not approve this site. I'm very familiar with it as well. It's within our Strathay ward, and I really don't think it fits in where it fits in. So that's why I've proposed that we reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson.
No, I think that the report outlines the proposal, and that's why I would like to go with the amendment.
Thank you. And now pass over to the clerk for the roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Provost McDade, as you weren't present for the full duration of the item, you will not be permitted to vote. Members, when I call your name, please let me know if you're voting for the motion to refuse or the amendment to approve. Councillor Allen.
Motion.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Motion.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Motion.
Councillor Harvey.
Motion.
Councillor James.
My motion, please.
Councillor McPherson.
Motion.
Councillor Massey.
Amendment.
Bailey McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Reid.
Motion.
Bailey Williamson.
Amendment.
Thank you. I have 9 votes for the motion and 3 for the amendment, and therefore the motion will carry.
Thank you. Therefore, planning permission is refused. Thank you. Okay, move swiftly on to the next one. Next one is for the alterations and extension to dwelling house and erection of a garage with ancillary accommodation unit, Gateside Farm, McClure, Perth. And to introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
Sorry, convener, it's actually myself. Change of scenery. So yeah, thank you. As stated, the next item on the agenda today is for alterations and extension to a dwelling house and the erection of a garage near McClure. I will now take the committee through a short presentation to detail the proposals further. So on this location plan here, we see the location of the site with the access shown to the A93. The site is to the southwest of Blairgowrie, and the dwelling house forms part of a small grouping of houses, some of which are still under construction. Next slide, please. Here we have an existing site plan. In this plan, you can see the extent of the garden ground associated with the property. Next slide, please. We now move on to a proposed site plan. It is proposed to extend to the rear of the property and erect a garage with ancillary accommodation in the northwest corner of the site. Next slide, please. We now move on to the proposed elevations. The extension is to be finished in a combination of stone and timber cladding with a traditional slate roof to match the existing. Next slide, please. Here we now see the side elevations. The red dotted line shows an existing extension which is proposed to be removed. Next slide, please. We now have the proposed ground floor plan. From this plan, you can tell that the original core of the building will remain with the extension to the rear, ensuring that the traditional character of the existing house is retained. Next slide, please. Here we have the elevations for the proposed garage building. I will now take members through a series of recent photographs to detail the proposal further. First image, please. This first photograph shows the dwelling house under question. The existing wooding extension on the principal elevation and the caravan you can see are to be removed. Conditional control will secure their removal. Next image, please. This next image shows a side elevation of the property under question. The extension will be contained within the area shown in this image. Next image, please. This image shows a newly constructed property to the north of the site known as Hog House, sorry. Next image, please. We now move back to the dwelling house under question. The proposed garage will be located approximately beyond the trailer in the photograph. Next slide, please. This final photograph shows the dwelling house under question in the context of the surrounding buildings. As seen, the existing dwelling house is smaller than the surrounding buildings, and there is suitable space for an extension and garage of this scale. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. We do have deputations on this, so I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputations procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call on Mr. Morocco? Mr. Morocco, you have 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes and I'll let you set up, and whenever you are ready, I'll start the clock.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I apologise, I've got a cold, so my voice is a bit croaky at the moment. I'm also glad to see that there's so many councillors here who sit on the Climate Change Committee and also have environmental interests. I think what I'm going to say you'll find quite interesting. Councillors, this application will see me losing 1.5 degrees Celsius of house heat from solar gain during crucial winter months, which is the difference between my newborn baby and family feeling warm and comfortable or being cold and uncomfortable, and us having to increase our carbon emissions by burning energy. This is a fundamental factor that the planning officer has failed to appreciate and thus gives sufficient weight to, meaning that a decision following his recommendation would be unreasonable. A second major ground to which insufficient consideration has been given by the planning officer is the degree of intrusion compromising the privacy of my home. Our home is only one room width wide, so we, including a newborn baby and 2 young children, will have no privacy. The children's downstairs bedroom has large windows, so their private bedroom where they get dressed, play and sleep will now be in full view from the proposed flat. Please understand the impact this is going to have on me and my family. The planning officer's report is not based on reasoned decision making. It fails to give reasonable and sufficient weight to the relevant facts regarding the 2 material planning considerations I've mentioned, which I will discuss in more detail in a minute. Therefore, this report is not a reasonable recommendation for approval. I would like to highlight that there are other more amenable options for siting the garage and flat, which would allow the applicant to achieve their desired outcome whilst not impacting our privacy and the utility of our house. The flat and garage could easily be moved to the eastern gable end of their existing house, a point where it would cause no issues to anybody. As their agent identifies, 90% of their land is undeveloped. Okay, let's look at point 49 of the planning officer's report regarding overshadowing. This is factually inaccurate and is an unreasonable assumption by the planning officer. We were advised by the planning department to add everything we may ever want to our planning application because permitted development had been revoked for these plots. We thought 7 years ago we may need an extension to care for elderly relatives, but they do not want to leave their homes, so we'll never be adding this extension to our house. Therefore, our house has reached its full potential for solar gain. The point about the 25-degree guidance is just guidance, and if we are considering site-specific circumstances, fails to appreciate the nature of our eco-house and gives insufficient weight to the design ethos of our home. This guidance, and I emphasise it is only guidance, may be applicable to a traditional house, but our eco-house relies on solar gain as one of the principal heat sources, and so should not be overshadowed at any time of the year. Point 50 follows a similar argument, but actually proves that our house will be overshadowed, but then goes on to present An unreasonable argument that any loss of light is minimal and restricted to the shortest days of the year, clearly failing to appreciate the importance of this overshadowing for our heating and provides insufficient evidence of how this is insignificant for us. I was so angry when I read point 50 because the planning officer's assessment is unreasonable and wrong, 100% wrong in this instance. I quote, restricted to the shortest days of the year, which equates to the months of November to February, 4 months or a third of the year. That is not insignificant. Since November, I've been monitoring the temperature fluctuations in our house from 3 to 4 p.m. when it will be shaded by the proposed garage and flat. During this time, our house naturally warms by 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius due to solar gain. So the loss of light is not, and I quote again, minimal. This is essential free heating at the end of the coldest days of the year. Furthermore, it is irrelevant how short the overshadowing period is. The fact that we are losing any solar gain or free heating is a massive issue. Houses lose around 0.5 degrees Celsius per hour without any heating. If this application is approved on a daily basis during the coldest period of the year, we stand to lose between 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius in free heating. Please think about that. It's akin to asking someone to turn off the gas boiler for an hour every day. Okay, councillors, I want to demonstrate how point 47 of the planning officer's report is unreasonable, and this relates to privacy. So I'm going to have to move away from the mic for a minute. So looking down here, I'm standing off to the side of you, but I'm looking at you, but I can still. All right, sorry. Okay, I'll do it here then. So I'm going to stand off to the side of you. I can still see you. And I'm going to stand at an angle to you. In my periphery vision, I can still see you. Or I could turn my head, or I can move my body and still see you. This demonstrates the planning officer's failure to appreciate that humans have a wide field of view and can move, which would allow anyone staying in the flat to look directly into our house, violating our privacy. The flat is 2.5 metres from the boundary edge, and the windows are 4.5 metres above ground level, so well above any permitted fencing or hedging, with a direct view into our living areas, our boys' bedroom, where they get dressed, and our house, which has 4 large southwest facing windows. Our house is only 1 room width wide, 4.6 metres, so we will have nowhere to hide. We will be visible throughout our house. There is no way to permanently block the line of sight from the flat to our house without further compromising the utility of our house. My wife and I both work from home, so our loss of privacy is constant. We're going to have the curtains closed more frequently to protect our privacy, which will also affect the solar gain potential of our house. My boys' grandparents will not be able to enjoy spending precious time with their grandchildren in privacy when they visit. If this application is approved, we will be the only house in this development that has no private area within the boundaries of our property. We positioned our house to ensure we had a private area to the southwest. We are located in a rural area. The small number of plots all have a lot of land. It's a small community of only 4 houses presently, so there's no need to be so inconsiderate. I hope that you view this case on a site-specific basis and consider our situation. As I mentioned earlier, the easy solution to this problem is to impose a condition on the application to move the garage and flat to the eastern end of the existing house. I cannot emphasise enough the level of anxiety this has caused for us at a particularly sensitive time when my wife's been pregnant and we now have a newborn. The loss of solar gain and privacy will negatively impact me and my family. I am appealing to your sense of reason because the siting of the garage and flat is unreasonable. I've got some. Am I allowed to pick these up? Can they? No. Sure. Okay. That's it. I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. And you're saying you're happy to take questions, so we'll give the members a chance to populate the chat. Councillor James.
Thanks very much, Deputy Convener. Mr. Morocco, thanks very much for your deputation. Really interesting and actually very relevant, because we've just been discussing this overshadowing problem with our last application. Sounds interesting, your house. Can you tell me a little bit how this solar gain actually works for you, please?
Yes. So our house has one principal heat source, which is a wood burning stove, and that is it. The rest of the house is just incredibly well insulated. It has all the large glass windows that you see, which we get solar gain from, and that's our secondary heat source. It's one room width wide, so that we don't have a cold side to the house, so that the heat is retained. There's mechanical ventilation which circulates the air around the house to the rest of the house. There's no radiators, there's no ground source heat pumps, there's nothing. It's just solar gain and a wood burning stove and really thick insulation on this house. It's an eco house. We thought we were doing our bit for the environment by moving here. Any overshadowing of the house will affect our heating completely. And it kind of ties into kind of 3 points that the council have. So the council have key strategies which support what we are doing with the design ethos of our house. And I'll quote directly from Perth and Kinross Climate Action Plan. Key principles of our climate change strategy to empower our communities in line with the Perth and Kinross offer. PKC will focus on the following strategic commitments: work in partnership with our residents, businesses and community partners, and support them to make transformational change. We feel that we are making transformational change by having a house like this. We all have an obligation to act now to mitigate the impacts of our natural and built environments through the reduction of greenhouse gases and adopting the principles of sustainable development. Direct quote from your local development plan 2019. This is what we've done by creating this house. And finally, reducing heat demand of new development through improving energy efficiency and decarbonising heat provision will also help mitigate the effects of climate change. Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 2018. This is what the solar gain from our windows does, and it will not work if it's in shadow. So actions speak louder than words, and the action of approving this planning application proves that these words are completely meaningless. So this is your opportunity to show that these words actually stand for something. Sorry.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. Morocco, for your presentation. Just a quick question, just to clarify, your objection is only to the garage and the flat above it, as I understand it, not to the extension that's been built. Am I right in saying that? You're not concerned about the extension?
Yes, you're right. I have no issues with the extension at all. It's just the siting of the garage and the flat.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. I was just typing in. I'll withdraw my question. Councillor Braun's just asked it. Thank you.
There are no further questions, Mr. Morocco. Thank you for your time. Can I call on Mr. McGregor? It's the agent and going to be supported by Mr. Grant, who, if there's questions, is there for that purpose. Yeah. So the same procedure, 10 minutes. I'll give you a prompt after a minute, and whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ian McGregor, here as the representative for Mr. Grant. I take this time to respond to the matters raised in objection to the application. The matters at hand are scale of the extension, overlooking of Hog House, overshadowing, the ancillary accommodation could be rented out or used as short-term let, and the ancillary accommodation fails to comply with the housing and countryside guidance. The scale of the extension is designed in such a manner that is wholly in context with the built and unbuilt development to the 5 new build plots in the immediate surrounding area. To the design, the aesthetically rewarding principal south elevation of the existing dwelling remains dominant, with the new extension facade being sited 3 metres back and the roof overhang 5.5 metres back to the face of the external wall. This is to achieve policy compliance through subservience of the new and the old, and to ensure integrity of the host dwelling remains. To the north, deemed the rear, the area has purposely been selected to accommodate the extensions. The northern element of the application site is considered a more appropriate location to round off and consolidate the building group. All built elements are designed with planning policy compliance in mind, taking full consideration of each. Acknowledgement of compliance is demonstrated with full support given to the design, and the following extracted from the delegated report of handling. Overall, the design of the proposed extension respects the design of the existing house and is appropriate for this rural area. In further regard to the scale, an appraisal of the immediate and wider area has been undertaken. The aforementioned 5 new build dwellings were firstly approved in an outline in 2009 and then by a plot by plot basis thereafter. Assessment of each of the adjacent plots identifies the following. One has a footprint of 191 square metres, one 195, one 240. Hog House was approved with a footprint of 140 square metres, but is built in part and it sits at 80 square metres. The application site dwelling is proposed with an overall footprint of 216 square metres. From the area analysis of built and unbuilt adjacent dwellings, it's demonstrated that development scale is wholly compatible, sitting comfortably within the area ranges. The proposed scale is fully supported within the delegated report of handling, which again states, whilst the existing house could be demolished and larger replacement dwelling house erected, the proposals allow for a significant increase in the level of living accommodation without the need to demolish the existing house. As a result of the proposed extension, the scale of the resulting dwelling house will be in keeping with the scale of the recently built and yet to be constructed houses in the vicinity. On the matter of overlooking to Hog House to the north, in regard to the matter of overlooking, in agreement with the delegated officer, our original application reference 23-00480 FLL was withdrawn. This being to address the matter of non-compliance with policy, i.e. that any apartment window being sited closer than 9 metres to the boundary of the adjacent residential property is non-compliant. Under the current application being addressed here today, the relevant windows now comply with policy and are now sited 9 metres clear from the boundary. In the context of distance, PKC's own policy is that where apartment windows to adjacent dwellings face each other directly, there must be a minimum distance of 18 metres between. The nearest window to the application site is sited in excess of 22 metres from Hog House, thus policy compliance is achieved. It is also clear from orientation of the application site dwelling and that of Hog House, apartment windows do not directly face each other. Again, policy compliance is achieved. In regard to the ancillary accommodation, apartment windows servicing the living room and living and bedroom areas are sited to the east elevation. During the design phase, the location of these was carefully considered, and these are specifically sited 90 degrees to the boundary of Hog House to provide no direct means of overlooking. Whilst objection of overlooking to external spaces of Hog House is noted, it is again considered appropriate to highlight that policy compliance is wholly achieved. This again is reinforced in the delegated report, which states the garden ground of Hog House is currently bounded by a post and wire fence which provides no privacy from any surrounding area. All of the windows on the north elevation of the proposed extension are over 9 metres from the boundary, with one being 13 metres from the boundary. At the closest point, the windows on the proposed extension are over 22 metres from Hog House. Furthermore, as the houses sit at an angle, the windows are not directly facing. An outbuilding in the curtilage of Hog House provides additional screening of the windows of Hog House. Given the current situation, the distances from the boundary and additional screening, the proposed extension will not result in undue increase in the level of overlooking to the house or to the north. In regard to the matter of overshadowing of Hog House, it is noted that concerns have been raised in regards to overshadowing. Policy requirement, as noted to the delegated report of handling, is to allow for a reasonable level of natural daylight to the internal living space of a neighbouring residential property. During the feasibility phase, the location of all parts of the development and surrounding area were given careful consideration. This to fully accord with the placemaking supplementary guidance, which states established practice determines that 25 degrees is a suitable maximum obstruction path which should be afforded directly to the front and rear aspect. Within the application content, compliance is fully demonstrated through a selection of shadow cast analysis undertaken for certain months of the year. These times of the year are indicated at quarterly points, then monthly from September onwards, as the latter months are shorter days and whereby the sun is lower on the horizon. On the 31st of March, there is no shadow cast to the dwelling. 22nd of June, the solstice, there is no shadow cast to the dwelling. 30th of September, no shadow cast. 31st of October, no shadow cast. 30th of November, there is a limited shadow cast for a period of 28 minutes at the day's end. 22nd of December, the solstice, there is a limited shadow cast for a period of 37 minutes at the day's end. It is clear from the above noted analysis that the shadow cast is for an exceptionally limited period and within an exceptionally limited period number of days to the year. Of significant relevance is the definition of sunset, the time in the evening when the sun disappears. For those limited time periods whereby the shadow cast is identified, that is the time frame within which the sun is not at optimum, but rather disappearing, transitioning from full surface to below the horizon. Thus, loss of daylight is not materially impacted. Further, there appears to be no consideration of the magnitude of winter cloud cover, which invariably in Scotland is at the time of year both relatively comprehensive and relatively consistent. Reinforcement of compliance is contained to the delegate's report of handling, which states the shadow cast assessment does show that there will be a shadow cast over the windows to the south elevation of Hog House, but this will be restricted to short periods at the ends of the shortest days of the year when light levels would already be low. Any loss of light to the garden of Hog House would be minimal, restricted to shortest days of year, and would only affect a minor proportion of a substantially sized garden. Given the above, the proposal will not result in undue overshadowing of the neighbouring residential properties. In the context of solar gain, the following is contained to the delegated report of handling. Concerns have been raised about overshadowing of Hog House and loss of solar gain. The approved plans for Hog House show a building with an L-shaped footprint with windows facing southwest and southeast. However, the house has not yet been completed in accordance with the approved plans, and it does not yet have a large windows facing southeast. As a result, Hog House has not yet reached its full potential for solar gain. Our response to this remains consistent with that of overshadowing insofar as this is for a limited time period within a time frame within this when the sun is not at optimum, but rather disappearing and transitioning from full surface to below the horizon. In equal measure, there appears to be no consideration again of the magnitude of winter cloud cover, which again invariably in Scotland at this time of year is relatively comprehensive and relatively consistent. I'll just summarise very quickly on the other matters, which is the short-term let. We are more than happy with any condition to be applied, and there was never any intent to have that as a use classification for the ancillary accommodation. And we note that while it's a matter at hand, the housing in the countryside policy, we note also that that's not deemed to be relevant as well. Thank you.
Members populate the chart for the questions. Councillor James.
Thanks, Convener. I got in early this time. I was having trouble getting into the chat. Thank you very much for your deputation, sir. You're saying about the property Hogshead not being completed, and therefore they're not getting full solar gain from the property. We've just heard from the gentleman who owns it that yes, it is complete and they do expect full solar gain. My question is, why specifically do you want your garage and flat where it is? Is there not somewhere else suitable on the site that would alleviate a problem? Thank you.
Yeah, the location was carefully selected. In terms of, there is a gap between the property to the east and obviously the gable of the application dwelling. But in terms of the spacing of the wider area, it would basically, by cramming it into that gap, one, it would have a material impact on the principal elevation of the house, but also we felt that it was to have the house, then the garage, and then quite a significant new build, which can be seen from one of the photographs. It would be it'd basically be too dense in terms of development. We felt that by positioning it over there, it rounded off and it consolidated the building group quite well. It also, in terms of as you approach, in terms of the massing, setting out of the wider development, felt it was more appropriate to have a good gap. There is also an electricity cable which runs on a south to north trajectory, so it's positioned across specifically to the boundary to allow future access, any maintenance or repair that's needed to that electricity cable should it be required. And it also, the position of it is to allow a windbreak to the north courtyard, we'll call it, which is sited between the extensions to a dwelling and hog house.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. McGregor. You made a significant commentary about hog house there, but I noticed from the plan, can we put the plan up? Is it possible? That last picture. I noticed from the plan that you're right up against the boundary. Is there any consideration to the property that's to the right hand side of you?
Sorry, I don't entirely follow in terms of what consideration to them.
My understanding is that the commentary you made was all about hog house, which sits opposite. Is that right? Yeah. I'm not understanding why you've gone straight to the boundary on this side and what material considerations were given to the property that's already there on the other side of that boundary.
When looking at it, there's, in terms of the material considerations of this one, effectively by positioning it in between there, I felt was an overdensity of development there. And in terms of that, I still don't really follow in terms of what the material consideration is to them. For me, there is no material consideration as to this one here. I'm not sure I entirely follow the nature of your question.
Councillor Allen, there's no further questions, so if you'd have to come to a point. You okay? Gentlemen, there's no further questions. You're free to go. Convener, there's no further deputation, so I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. Can I ask members if they have any questions for officers? Councillor James.
Surprise, Convener. Thank you very much. My question is to the officers. When this application came in, was there discussion to actually move the garage back? And I noticed the applicant made reference to the sizing and position and everything else, but was it actually discussed? I'm just seeing a problem that could quite easily be solved here. Just wondered what the outcome was.
Hi, Councillor James. No, it wasn't discussed. The reason it wasn't discussed is, as Mr McGregor highlighted, we're quite content with the position of the garage because we don't want to result in an overdense development next to the existing buildings. So we find where the garage is located is actually appropriate for this rural environment because it keeps a separation between buildings as per the rest of the building group. if they were to move it to the area where the caravan is just now, where the parking is, that would really deteriorate the character of this rural area, we felt. So in answer to your question, no, we didn't speak to them about moving the garage because we are quite content with where it is for this site.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor James.
Yeah, sorry, Convener. Perhaps I should have asked this one to Mr. Morocco as well. I know when we're looking at planning applications, we're looking at being, site specific. In this instance, and it actually goes with the case we heard just a minute ago. The neighbours do have a say. So when we're looking at site specific, we don't take into consideration, circumstances around it. I'm just worried. As somebody who lives in a house south facing, where I gain quite a lot of heat during the day, and it's noticeable. It's the loss of sunlight is very, very important. How much weight has been given to that? I know we're looking at this planning application, but it's the cause to the neighbour, which is the problem. Can that really be taken into consideration?
You're absolutely correct, Councillor James, that everything is site specific and we do take everything into account that's around the site. But in this instance, I draw your attention to paragraph 47 of the report. The garage itself is 32 metres away from Hog House. That is quite significant for a building that's only 6 metres in height. I'd also point out as well that Hog House is actually subject to its own enforcement investigation because it's actually been built in the wrong place. It's been built 3 metres closer to the applicant's property than it should have been. So if it was built in the right place, that would still be 35 metres away. That's a considerable amount of distance. And you can see in paragraph 50, we have done a shadow cast assessment. And as Mr. McGregor highlighted through his deputation, it was literally a matter of minutes in the winter months that would impact the house itself. There's no impact on the house at all during the spring, summer and autumn. So from our point of view, we are absolutely content there is no detrimental overshadowing to Hog House itself.
Thanks for that. I totally get that. But my point I suppose I'm making is that, yes, the overshadowing is in the winter months. And yes, it might only be for half an hour, but that half an hour is critical. Especially in the winter when you're relying on it for your heat.
Yes, I do get what you're saying, but without stepping on Mr. Elliott's toes, I do think it'd be a very difficult appeal to defend if we were refusing something on overshadowing when it's 32 metres away from the building under question.
Thank you, Councillor James. Any further questions? Oh, one's came in. Bailey McLaren.
Yeah, just a quick one. And I'm possibly thinking, what our officer is going to say. It was about Mr. Morocco's presentation was also about quite a considerable loss of privacy that they felt they were going to experience, particularly from the garage windows. Is that something you have taken into account, and is that something we should be taking into account?
Yes, overlooking is something that absolutely both us and yourselves need to take into account. The Council's placemaking guide stipulates that windows need to be 9 metres from the boundary, which in this case have been achieved. But again, the window in the garage is 32 metres from Hog House itself, which is well in advance of the Council's supplementary guidance for placemaking. So again, it would be considered unreasonable to refuse on that basis when the applicant has adhered to our approved supplementary guidance.
Thank you. Any further questions? No further questions? And I'll put forward a motion myself for approval, subject to conditions contained in the report and handling. Can I have a seconder? Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, happy to second, Convener.
Do we have an amendment? No amendment. Oh, Councillor James.
I give up. I've got a keyboard like me that doesn't work. Yes, I just have real severe doubts about this. I'm worried about the shadow casting during the critical time when you're actually reliant on the angle of the sun and the solar gain. I would, if the applicant's not keen to move that garage block, then you know, if we can't condition for that, then I would seek refusal, convener. Thank you. I prefer the garage to be moved, to be fair, but you know, I don't think the issue is with the house. It's only the position, not position of the garage block, not anything else to do with it. Thank you.
Councillor Braun, I see you have got an A in the chat. Is that you want to second that?
Well, I will do now. Councillor James has jumped the gun and got him before me with his magic fingers. So I would second that, yes. But again, like he said, if we could get the garage moved, since that's the problem rather than the extension, if we could condition, but I don't think we can condition it. So Mr. Elliott will clarify that, but I don't think we can. But if we could, that would be the preferable option. But I don't think we can split an application like that. So I will second second as it is.
Okay, Councillor James, and have you decided on what grounds you want refusal?
And again, sorry. Yeah, I was looking at MPF 4, policy 14B, sustainable, supporting the efficient use of resources. This isn't, to my mind, we've allowed the build of an eco property and we're actually not supporting the efficient use of the resource that property is using. So MPF 4 policy 14, I haven't even looked at the LDP bit yet, but again,
I'll bring in Mr. Elliott now.
Sorry, thank you.
Councillor James, I'm sure it won't come as any surprise, given what we've heard, that there is a very, very limited shadow cast, and I do have considerable concern about putting forward a motion to refuse on that basis. I appreciate what you're saying, but we're talking a maximum, as I heard, 37 minutes on the shortest day of the year. Obviously you have to take into account what is reasonable as well. So I do have significant concern about this being able to stand up. That's my first comment. But the policy grounds, yes, there are policy grounds, but I think you really have to address, first of all, I mean, it wouldn't be overlooking because, as you've heard, it's 32 metres window to window. So really we're talking shadow, you are talking shadow cast. So I think I first of all have to ask whether you are still wishing to proceed with your motion to refuse in light of my comments.
And Mr. Elliott, I go back to what I said just a minute ago. You know, shortest days of the year, yeah, that's fine, which means it's the shortest amount of sunlight. So even the shortest amount that you're missing is a huge impact. You know, 10% of 100 is far more than 10% of 10, or far less than 10% of 10. So if it's difficult to,
I appreciate you coming from Councillor James, but I think the territory I think you're getting into is a difficult one where you're close to saying there should never be any shadow cast of any property. And that's you would then what would be thrown against you there would be that's not reasonable. So
totally
if it was a far greater
Elliott.
degree, I wouldn't be. If it was a far greater degree, say for 6, I mean, I'm giving an exaggerated a period here, but if it was 6 months of the year, I could understand that. I don't think officers would be recommending approval in that case. But we are talking what is being described as very marginal. So I think I'm addressing my question again, whether you're still wishing to proceed in light of that. And I appreciate, you know, where you're coming from. I appreciate what the objector's saying, but you have to look in terms of policy, whether that would be appropriate to put forward. I won't say any more than that. Of course, you have to. I'm asking you, do you still want to put it forward?
Can I come in, Mr. Elliott? Councillor, would you mind if I just step in for a sec?
Please
I'm along the same lines as Councillor James. I mean, I think the essential point here is that it's an eco house. Therefore, solar gain is the ultimate priority for it, to keep it warm. My thoughts have been, if I'd got in first, would have been to consider policy 1A, policy 17 and policy NPF 16G. They were the three that I would have thought of. I think, as I say, it hinges on the fact this is an eco house that needs the sunlight, the solar gain to make it work. And if, as Councillor James, you take 30 minutes off in the winter, as Mr. Morocco said, that can make a bit of a difference to a house. So they were my thoughts, Mr. Elliott. I'm not sure if, I say, you feel they would stand, but I'll wait your comment as always on that.
Yes, piece what you're saying. Of course, I think as the objector said, the primary source is actually the wood burning stove plus all the insulation. I don't want to go too much further than that, getting into the real technicalities. But again, I don't think I'm really changing my comments, councillors, as to I do have significant concerns about you advancing this. Yes, the policy I did spot in line with previous refusal policy NPF 4 policy 16G2, I think it would be, and you have also policy 1A and 1B, 1A certainly. I'm not sure about 1BC.
No.
So I think I'm. As a matter of principle, are you still willing to go ahead within that context of what's been said?
Like you say, Mr. Elliott, I think it's a very, very difficult. We're caught between a rock and a hard place here. You know, my feeling is that, you know, you want to do the right thing for everybody, and I think that there's an easy solution by the applicant just to move the garage by a few feet, in fact, or meters. But I think this is going to be very difficult for you as a solicitor to defend if it went to an appeal. So I don't know how Councillor Braun feels about this.
You're right, it's a difficult one. It's a hazy area because, as I say, it's the eco house is the thing. There's already a motion in place. I'm wondering whether it should just go simply to a vote and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I think that's the way forward, but I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Elliott. It's a difficult one. It is a difficult one, there's no doubt about it, but we've got a committee of 13 here, so I think let's just let it ride and see what happens.
Bear with me, I'm just writing it down what the terms of the motion would be.
Okay.
I'm getting the correct the policy you referred to.
Whilst Mr. Elliott is doing that, can I ask members for any comments on the report? Okay, no comments on the report. Then I will sum up my motion. It's been a lot's been said about the garage. I feel that this development is well within the parameters that are required legally. It's 39 metres away from the window. I just feel that this is perfectly all right. So I just go for permission. Now, generally, you would get to sum up, Councillor James, but we'll wait until Mr. Elliott is finished. Okay.
Thank you, members. So sometimes they're more difficult than others to phrase, but I think Councillors James and Braun, what I would say is my understanding of what you're looking to diffuse on. Proposal is contrary to NPF 4 policy 14B sustainable policy and NPF 4 policy 16G2 quality homes, as well as your local development plan to policy 1A placemaking, as the proposal would adversely impact on the neighbouring eco property Hog House due to the shadow cast. Would that be accurately reflecting your amendment to refuse?
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to sum up, Councillor James?
Only in as much, convener. I mean, a lot's being said, and you know, so often on a planning committee, we sit here and you know we look at the application in front of us, and today twice now, we've had an impact on a neighbouring property, which you know I'd like to take cognizance of. The other thing, of course, with this property in particular, or the neighbouring property, we do have a climate change committee, and we do set a set of conditions, and we encourage people to make their homes more sustainable, more green, and here we are, you know, one of the first hurdles, and you know what appears to be a block to that. So you know, I'm not in. I don't disagree with the property. You know, the size of the property, only the position of the garage block with the flat and its impact on the neighbouring property. That's so. Thank you for that, convener.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to the clerk for the roll call vote.
Thank you, convener. Members, when I call your name, please let me know if you're voting for the motion to approve or the amendment to refuse. Councillor Allen.
Motion.
Councillor Anderson. Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Motion.
Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harvey. I'll move on. Councillor James.
Amendment, yes, thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Motion.
Councillor Massey.
Motion.
Provost McDade.
Motion.
Bailey McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Stewart.
Motion.
Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Bailey Williamson.
Motion.
Councillor Harvey. I have 8 votes for the motion and 4 for the amendment, and therefore the motion will carry.
Thank you. Therefore, planning permission is granted, subject to conditions contained in the report of handling. Thank you. Okay, move on. Okay, yeah, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Okay, folks, that's us back on now. Okay, so the next one is for a change of use, alterations and extension to agricultural steadings to form 7 dwelling houses, erection of a dwelling house and associated works at Conveyed Farm, Munady, Perth. And to introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
This last local application under consideration relates to a proposal which, along with a parallel application for listed building consent, was considered at the meeting of the committee in July 2022. That application was for the creation of 6 dwellings with 2 additional enabling dwellings, but was refused by members as contrary to Policy 1 placemaking of the adopted local plan. The subsequent appeal was also dismissed. This application seeks a similar level of development, although the enabling development dwelling would now be located towards the east, and the array of solar panels has also been dropped from the proposals. This application has received 11 letters of support and a neutral representation flagging concerns at the loss of trees and overlooking. The application has ultimately been referred to committee in light of the recommendation being contrary to the previous committee decision. This aerial extract shows the location of the site northwest of Menidi and north of the B8063, which runs from Lunkerty and Redgorton towards Harrietfield and beyond. The site is accessed from an existing junction on the C408 road, which leads from Menidi to Bankfoot. Next slide, please. Here we see the proposed site plan. The northmost building in the centre is the Category C listed steading and associated horse mill, which would be converted to 2 dwellings. The immediate arrays to the south would see existing buildings replaced with new build structures in scale and alignment faithful to the existing arrangement. Lastly, to the east, a new build dwelling is sited, the profits from which would assist in the cross-funding to make this development viable. Next slide, please. In comparison, and for members' information, we see the layout of the previously refused application. As you will see, the 2 enabling dwellings are located to the north in the foreground of the listed building when viewed from the access approach, while an array of solar panels was previously proposed in the tail of the site extending westwards. Next slide, please. We now see some of the elevations of the proposals. On the left is part of the converted listed steading, while on the right is the replacement farmhouse. Next slide, please. Next, we see the sections through the site on the left with further elevations of the new build dwellings on the right. Next slide, please. This next plan shows the extent of works required to the listed building. The blue shading is the horse mill, which due to its intricate timber design cannot be retained and converted. It would be rebuilt. The red shading relates to a more modern extension, which would be removed in its entirety. And the green area illustrates where wall repairs are required. It's accepted that the roof would also have to be replaced, although the finer details of material reuse, etc., can be secured via conditions. Next slide, please. This last plan shows the proposed new build dwelling to the east of the main farm complex. I'll now take members through a series of site photos to detail the proposals further. This first image shows the approach towards the existing buildings from the north. The listed steading is towards the centre and right of the photo. Next image, please. Next, we see the arrangement from within the existing courtyard, which this application seeks to replicate. Next image. This photo shows the existing farmhouse at the southeastern corner of the buildings and the adjoining offshoots of link steadings. Next image. We now see a closer image of the eastern gable of the listed steading and horse mill. Next image, please. This photo shows the access track looking back northwards towards the C408. Next image, please. And these last images show the view northwards and southwards respectively on the C408 and illustrate that adequate visibility can be achieved in both directions. Next slide, please. Lastly, to clarify, following the publication of the report, it's been identified that there are a few minor amendments required to some of the proposed conditions relating to Condition 3 materials, 4 boundary treatments, 12 foul drainage, 16 barn owls and 17 contaminated land, with a requirement to amend the timescales to be tightened to make more specific reference to either prior to commencement or in some instances occupation of the first dwelling house. Thank you, Convener. That now concludes my presentation. I'll leave members with the site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We do have a deputation on this, so I'll hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputation's procedures.
I'd like to invite Mr. Thompson. And I believe you're going to be supported by Mr. Caird and Mr. Sturrock. Mr. Thompson, you have 10 minutes for your deputation. Okay, that's fine. Grand, okay. Okay, members, we're going to go straight to questions, so we'll give the chat box a time to populate. Sorry, they're the applicants. Yeah.
Sorry guys, can I pop on there? Is that okay? Applicant Peter Thompson there, myself, Chris Caird and Doug Sturrock are the agents for John Falani Architect.
Councillor James.
Always me. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along today. I'm guessing you've done some consultation with the local residents in Menidi, as it's refreshing to see 11 letters of support rather than the same amount of objections. Have the village been supportive of you?
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor James. We engaged with the local community council following the committee meeting here previously and following the appeal to the Scottish Government. That consisted of myself and Mr Thompson attending the community council and presenting the revised proposals, which looked to alleviate any of the concerns that were raised previously. Mr Thompson then subsequently held open days, site open days across a couple of weekends, subsequent weekends, which we were or are aware or believed to be aware that all concerns were then alleviated.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. There's no further questions. There's no further deputations. I'll hand back to you, convener.
Thank you. And thank you for the deputation's patience sitting there all day for one question. Thank you. Can I ask, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Anderson.
Just a quick one. Looking at the plan on screen, I was not sure whether it's maybe a tree, I think, in front of the southeast quadrant of the site. Quite a lot of developments, setting developments in this area have retained the mill ring shed. I know Ross Farm down where I am in the Cars, there's another one further. There's a number of them in the Cars being retained and built within the development. Do you not feel it was worth listening that it should be possibly retained and be involved in the reconstruction element of it?
Sorry, was this in respect? I picked up on the first element being in respect of trees, but then is it actually in respect of the retention of the steading buildings, etc., that you're asking?
The mill ring shed to be demolished.
The listed building to the north, the horse mill, would be removed. It's no longer in a state that can be retained. It's in a very precarious condition in respect of its timber supports and structure. However, the main elements of the steading and the stone built elements would be retained as part of this and converted.
Thank you.
Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, my question is about the developer contributions and why the council has actually accepted the developer contributions rather than creating housing on the site.
Yeah, certainly in respect of the developer obligations in this instance, it's obviously quite a complex scenario and has obviously been a long running application in this instance. Obviously, given the ability to try and get interest by a registered social landlord or other party, it's unlikely that they would be interested in a site such as this. Therefore, in this instance, that's why it's been considered acceptable to go down the route of seeking contributions as the alternative.
Thank you. Doesn't seem to be any further questions. Let's see, Councillor Allen put in a motion about 30 minutes ago. No, Councillor Allen, you put forward a motion.
I'm minded to put in a motion to accept the recommendation of the officers.
I see that Councillor Reid has seconded that.
Yes, happy to second.
Thank you. Do we have an amendment? No amendment. Therefore, permission is granted subject to the conditions that officers have added to the the conditions. Okay, the amendments added to conditions. Thank you. Okay. swiftly move on. So this is now for the item 6, which is a pre-application notice, and it's a development of a wind farm comprising installation of 8 turbines up to 48 megawatt, formation of access roads with passing places, ancillary development including crane, hard standings at turbine bases, substations, storage compound, formation of a temporary construction compound, laydown area and associated works. And that's land 1.5 kilometre northeast of Ernst, I can't even see that, Ernieside, Farmhouse, Dunning, Glen, Dollar. Any comments on the plan? Councillor Cuthbert.
Given this is in Kinross or adjacent to it, it's not surprising, but there's two things I'd ask officers to look at. There's the question of the cumulative impact. We've got an application coming in here, but there is, I think there are 2 others with the energy unit, and we need to consider that cumulative impact. These wind turbines are something like 200 meters from the bottom to the tip, so they are enormous, and they'll be sitting on top of the hills. So it's a question of how that's going to relate to the other developments. The other thing is, I would ask officers to consult with Fossaway Community Council. Given the scale of these developments, they've been doing a big questionnaire with all their locals and so on. And I would ask officers to liaise with them just to get a feel for what they're coming up with in terms of how it should be dealt with, and also the potential for funding opportunities. There is talk of £5,000 per kilowatt or whatever it is that might be going into community pot, and they are talking to all the community councils locally about how best to utilise that money. So rather than just rushing into it, if you can talk to the Fossaway Community Council, they've got some input to give you. Thank you, that's all.
Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, a couple of comments, convener. One is about a traffic management plan to get access to the site, the timings of construction work, and if compounds are going to be made, etc. Excuse me. The try and mitigate against light pollution, and also wildlife service.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Yeah, I think Councillor Cuthbert and Bailey Williamson have raised issues I was going to raise. Just the visual impact. I think, you know, our countryside is blighted with these wind turbines, and I just wouldn't like to see the countryside destroyed or visually. So just take all of those into cognizance. Thank you.
Thank you. No more comments. So that's us for today. So I'd just like to thank everybody for their attendance, and thank you the deputations for their attendance. I see they're all the way home, and thank you to our press for sticking with us all day. So thanks everyone. See you later.